everyone.
Hello.
I know it's past 5 o'clock. We're always told it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Well, it's 5 o'clock now. So I'll keep it really, really short. I had wanted to walk you through the opportunities in real estate in Kenya. I won't go into the numbers because a lot of people have spoken about the numbers. So today I'll just talk about the opportunities. So the government is concentrating on affordable housing. And as you had, there's a gap of about 2,000 plus homes needed within the Nairobi market or the Kenyan market. And most of these homes, 60% of them are affordable housing, so there's a bit going on there. The middle class has expanded and has expanded really fast, really well, which comes to show the growth of the country. And Kenya's GDP has held on very strong, as DTB mentioned. We are about 5%, 5.4%. So that has proven to be really good for the last 5 years, showing that we are a stable economy. Now, let me get to what is important for you guys. As a foreigner, how can you invest in Kenya? How easy is it to invest in Kenya? And what are the processes for investing in Kenya? So, number one, it's very easy to invest in our country. Extremely easy. With your passport, all you need to get is a KRA number. KRA stands for Kenya Revenue Authority. All right. We at Val Real Estate have perfected the art of having foreigners invest in our properties. Actually, 50% of our investors are foreigners that we've helped from beginning to end. In Kenya, as a foreigner, you can own 100% of your property so long as it's a leasehold property. So in Kenya, you're not allowed to own any piece of property that is freehold because we're protecting our nation and etc. But so long as it's leasehold, you can own the property. Leases start at about 99 years. Some leases in Nairobi are 45 to 50 years, but it's always renewable. When it comes to apartment properties owning, you have a sectional title, which is something new that the government has rolled out. That way you are not tied to the mother title, which was what was happening before. Before you'd have a lease and you kind of get a share of the mother title, but the mother title retains. But now what is happening is that everyone gets their own title deed, so your apartment has an old title deed and you can go to the bank and get a loan and etc. because you own the property. All right. So I'll quickly just walk you through the documentation you need to have a KRA PIN. And this is, again, very, very simple. Extremely simple. With good legal representation, you're good. All right? I always advise my buyers, get yourself a lawyer. Get yourself a lawyer you trust. Get yourself a lawyer who's actually registered under the LSK, the Law Society of Kenya. So when you get a lawyer, go to their website, LSK, and just check, is this lawyer registered under them? If they are, I think you're pretty safe. All right, so what do you need? You'll need a letter of introduction by a tax agent. So this will be done by your legal representative, nothing to worry about. If you don't find one, please come get my business card and I'll connect you to the right person. Number two, you will need the tax agent's PIN and a valid tax compliance certificate of the tax agent. So they need to know that, you know, the person that you're working with is actually paying their taxes. Number three, you'll need a letter from the tax agent. Number four, you need proof of the investment. All right. So this will be your sale agreement or whatever ownership document that the developer or the person that you're buying your property from will be having. Then you'll get an endorsement from the Kenya Investment Authority. So again, this is a letter that will be arranged for by your lawyer, nothing big. And then now you'll have the different types of investor permits that you can get. So to own a property, very simple. You get your KRA PIN, you have your passport, you're done, process is complete. It takes about 3 months for a standard transaction for a complete property. And it will take about, dependent on how fast they develop their property, 2 to 4 years, dependent on how far the development is going. So you can choose to buy a complete property or you can choose to buy a property that is ongoing. I will always advise my clients, please do your due diligence when you're buying property. Eddie has left, but he had mentioned how in the diaspora you're giving money to your uncle who's taking a video of your neighbor's property. Unfortunately. So it's always good to transact with the entity themselves, which banks like DTB have made it very simple. We as Val Real Estate do have accounts with DTB. So when you're transacting, you're putting your money in the Val Real Estate account under DTB. That way, you know, Val is an entity that is internationally recognized and DTB is an entity that is internationally recognized. So you have two different companies buffering you and just giving you that validity of safety. So do your due diligence. I don't think I want to talk too much. I want to keep this short, precise. If you want a long conversation, again, I'm still around, get my business card. I'll take questions, but I want to answer one. Someone mentioned about property by the beachside. Who was that?
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, how are you? So there are developers who are developing something in the beachside.
A lot of developments.
What was happening before was that everyone was developing these massive townhouses, you know, something that is either you have to rent as an Airbnb for 6-7 people, or you have to be very, very rich in order to afford. But we've seen the trend changing where people now, even the government themselves, have started giving a higher limit of height clearance so that you can be able to build a little bit higher. We have seen people now looking at doing studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, that make it a little bit more affordable to buy property by the beachside. We do have something coming up. I will not shamefully plug myself, I want to. But do come, we do have something coming up within the next year or so. And I know other developers are having the same thing. Yeah. So if you're here, you can always manage the property yourself. If you're outside, as my counterparts mentioned, you can have a property manager managing it for you. And now we are having very strong companies actually doing property management and doing it well. Return on investment used to be maybe 4 to 6% at max, but at Val Real Estate we are seeing 8% to 18% return on investment, depending on how well we manage your property and the location that your property is in. I don't know if anyone has a question. I like keeping my things short. Any question? Yeah.
What are property taxes like here?
Oh, fantastic. The pertinent question.
Yeah.
I like that. Property taxes for foreigners are 30%. You're looking at a 30%. 30%. That's what you're looking at. As a local, you are looking at 10% as of now, the building pass, so 10%. But there are always ways to mitigate that, okay? Someone who's done in real estate for a while will show you the ropes. So there is one way. It's a bit expensive, I won't lie to you, yeah? You're looking at spending between $8,000 to about $12,000, and then you need to have in your account about $100,000 that you've put in your account just to show that you have the capability, and you'll get an investor's visa. When you get the investor visa, you automatically move to the lower tax bracket. So there are always ways to mitigate that, but outright upfront, you're looking at 30%.
That's on capital gains or yearly?
Yearly rental.
Yearly rentals, on rentals,
Yes,
okay.
yes. Any other question? All right, thank you so much, guys. Have a very good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Susan. We will now move to a special topic on diaspora repatriation and engagement. And the challenges. This main objective is to study and inform bilateral agreements between Africa and the Caribbean using a decolonial framework. Moreover, Dr. Eugene's research takes up the historical struggles for repatriations by conceptualizing it as a liberation praxis for enslavement, colonialism, neocolonialism in New World making. Also to join me on stage, Cesar Cabezas. I hope I said that correctly.
Cesar Cabezas.
Cabezas. Thank you. Afro-Colombian economic and social empowerment leader, human rights defender, and historian. Cesar is an empowerment leader and human rights defender of the Afro-Colombian community, historian and social scientist with more than 20 years of work in the Afro-Colombian social basis for the empowerment and promotion of the rights of Black people. He is part of the High-Level Advisory Commission for Black Afro-Colombian, Palenquera and Raizal communities, and the National Space for Prior Consultations of the Black Afro-Colombian Palenquera, I hope I'm saying this correct.
Palenquero.
Palenquero.
Yes.
Okay, and Raizal communities. Caesar has participated in different seminars and conferences, both within Colombia and internationally. He has led international seminars on interculturality and city development, national meetings for university students of African descent, and the Forum on Ethno-Education and African Studies. Fabian,
And I'll help translate for Cesar, since we don't have an official translator.
Oh, okay,
so
I see.
I'm here to facilitate.
And Fabian is the translator.
For now.
For now. Okay, so the first question is, what are the primary, what are the primary motivations for individuals from the Caribbean and Colombia to repatriate to Africa?
Charlie, you want to take it while I translate?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I want to thank the organizers and the partners for putting this event together and everyone for being here. I learned a lot. As much as I'm on the panel speaking, to be honest with you, I'm literally taking in so many things, even in some of the questions around the issues to relocate, etc. A lot of that is new for me, new to me, although I've heard it to a certain degree, but just to hear people's full experiences. So I just want to thank everyone for being here, the partners, organizers, etc. And your question was the desire for people in the diaspora, particularly in the Caribbean, to repatriate.
Yeah.
So my entry point to this conversation is from a decolonial lens. And what does that mean? Even through the conversation that have been taking place today, one thing I'll say, yes, transatlantic slavery happened, colonialism happened, and as we could talk about neocolonialism. And I want to say this didn't just happen from the Africans that were stolen to the Caribbean, but colonialism also happened in the African continent as well, right? So even with some of I say that just first to have some grace with each other, right? When we talk about the struggles, I'll say we also should have patience to understand that it's a process. 300 to 400 years of enslavement, colonialism, etc. will not happen in 20, 30 years because some people are now realizing Africa is the place to be, right? So we have to be patient with each other. I just want to put that out there, right? And the desire, and going back to the question about the desire, one thing I want to say, this is not new, right? It has re-emerged, but it's not new. For example, Rastafari, and I'm going to say Rastafari has been a pillar in the advocacy and the return, right, to Africa.
From Bob Marley
right?
days.
So Bob Marley, and people even before Bob Marley, I want to even push it back further, right after emancipation or even the emancipation movement in the Americas, you had people who were running away, escaping slavery, people who were free, mobilizing people across the African diaspora to go back to Africa.
Yeah.
So that idea of return is not something that's relatively new. The desire has always been there from the time the very first African was stolen from the continent.
Yes, true.
Right? So let's give it that historical context,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And now I talk about Rastafari. Rastafari was the main pillar, or the praxis, I would say, that for us to bring that idea of Africa, pride in the diaspora and the desire to return. Right? In the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen that re-emergence through, I think I would say, a global consciousness raising, right? Young people in particular, we've seen something wrong in the world. Well, you know what, I apologize, pause. Let's even go back, right? In the 1950s and 60s, during the independence movement in the Caribbean and Africa, across Africa, you had African leaders. When you think of Kenyatta, when you think of Nkrumah, they were working closely with Caribbean thinkers and activists as well, right? When you think of CLR Jin, when you think of Nkrumah's administration, Nkrumah administration had a lot of Caribbean figures in there.
Yeah,
Right? So those things are not new. So what we're talking about are not new. Is that colonialism disrupted that relationship post-independence.
Yeah.
So now let's fast forward, now bring it back. Now you have that global consciousness movement with young people in particular that are now understanding, they realize they could articulate something is wrong in the world. You know, I was having that conversation with my colleague Monday last night, you know, being a parent of a 5-year-old, there's this fear that you have, well, for me as a parent, excuse me, when you think of the climate change situation, when you think about global warming, climate change, when you think about wars that are happening in Europe, the continent, African continent, and even when you think about what's taking place in America, specifically in Haiti, there's this fear. But at the same time, I would see it as an opportunity for us to reimagine what we want and what we could be. So when you talk about in my introduction about thinking of black futures, I really think we're in a very interesting moment, right? For us to imagine what we want. So I love this forum, to talk about the economic aspect, but that's part of a larger conversation about relocating and rethinking or understanding our Africanness, right? So even when we talk about, sorry, I know I'm saying a lot, but I feel it's all connected because I feel like we cannot just speak about one thing and contextualizing it. Right? So even when you talk about reparations, the global reparations movement, specifically in the Caribbean, His Excellency was there. Barbados is leading it from a government perspective, and recently, as in Ghana, I think it was in December, where the African Union and CARICOM had a reparations conversation, right? We talk about reparative justice, but one thing we need to talk about when we're thinking about reparations is the repairing the relationship that was destroyed between Africa and the African diasporas. Right, so I'll just leave that there. So the desire is something that has always been there, but now it's just being repackaged. And that's the thing. I think we should trace that history, pull from that history, and to imagine where we want to be, rather than trying to recreate a wheel. Right? What has already been established that have worked, and what were the gaps? What were the barriers? And how could we think? How do we contextualize it to our local context? All right. Thank you.
Buenas tardes para todos y todas.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Agradecer Consejo Panafricano, Fabian, por la invitación aquí.
Thank the Pan-African Council for the invitation.
Dos puntos principales para entrar en la premisa que me hace en introducción.
He wants to highlight 2 points in relation to the question.
Somos 50 millones de habla hispana, de afrodescendientes de habla hispana.
There's about 50 million people of African descent that speak Spanish as a first language.
Mi país, Colombia, somos el país de habla hispana que más población negra tiene en las Américas.
Is one of those countries with the most Spanish-speaking people of African descent.
Oh, wow.
De toda la diáspora que se encuentra esparcida en el mundo, todos los africanos que estamos en el mundo, hay un componente importante, un segmento importante, que es la diáspora de habla hispana.
Of all the global Africans that you find in the world, the Spanish-speaking world is also a very important aspect of it.
Y necesita después de 400 años encontrarse con sus hermanos y hermanas.
And it's high time that after 400 years we find ourselves amongst our brothers and sisters.
Establecer relaciones.
Establish relationships.
Culturalmente somos parecidos, tenemos todo igual, y en 400 años no vamos a buscar integrarnos con los que nunca nos han aceptado en la diáspora.
And then we have so many things that are so similar of our cultures and things that we've carried as a heritage and a legacy, but we've been separated from our brothers and sisters.
La sociedad colombiana es parte del colonialismo que ha azotado a África y a la diáspora por igual.
Just as Africa was colonized, Colombia was also colonized and divided by
Caribbean context, or how people in the Caribbean view folks on the continent. I would say what I've been pushing for the last 5 to 6 years, and I'll make that intervention from the education point of view. I think some kind of decolonial re-education needs to take place, right? I think the education system, I think you mentioned the education system. I think the education system is so vital in for us to understand each other. And I think what is vital, and part of that is what is the creative industries. That's why I think when we talk about investment and trade, I know that what we'll be speaking about, but I'll get into that later. I think education and the creative industries could help in bridging that gap. So when you talk about the struggles, I think I mean, excluding the system in place, right? The system that we know, the colonial system that we are battling with, trying to dismantle and reimagine for us to work for us. But I think a key part of that is the misunderstanding that we have with each other. So building on the point that my brother said earlier on in regards to the language barrier, when you think about colonialism, they even separate us via language, where we don't even understand each other, or we have certain perceptions about each other based on how media have represented us for the last 50 plus years. Right? So I will say with the education piece, a decolonial re-education needs to take place where we are telling our own stories and how we think about ourselves. Right?
Es un poco extraño esta situación. En contexto les comento.
This situation is a little strange. I'll put you in context.
Yo vivo en un país que es 2 veces más grande que Kenia, pero con la misma población de Kenia.
I live in a country in terms of surface area is twice the size of Kenya, but has the same number of population as Kenya.
Y de esos más de 50 millones de colombianos, cerca del 25% de esa población es población negra, población africana.
So of the 50 million people we have in our country, 1/4 is of African descent.
Desde luego que acá se desconoce, pues, porque las dinámicas del panafricanismo del 1921, 1924, los congresos, pues no se pensó en esa diáspora también de que hablaba español, que había una diáspora notoria en este contexto.
So often when we look at the history of Pan-Africanism and some of the Pan-African congresses that were happening around major capitals of the world, the Spanish-speaking population was not known or was excluded just by lack of knowledge.
Yeah, so true. That's so true. Yeah.
Y cuando tú vas a observar, en Colombia tú encuentras muchas Nairobis, muchas Accra, muchas El Cabo, muchas, o sea, encuentras muchas ciudades africanas en Colombia.
And the funny thing is, when you actually go to Colombia, you see that a lot of the town and city names have names like Nairobi.
Oh, really?
Oh,
wow.
Within Colombia.
Algunos amigos que han estado acá, Lumas, Jennifer también es de Colombia.
Lumas lived in
Taichung
Colombia.
conoce.
Jennifer's from Colombia. He knows his ways.
Hay ciudades que tú llegas y si no hablas, y si ellos no hablan, no se van a identificar que son de otro contexto, pero son ciudades africanas, 100%.
We have cities that are, above 98% African, and you get there, and other than the language, you don't know that you wouldn't know you'd be in Africa.
Yeah.
Y esas barreras culturales, de hecho, llegué por primera vez, porque es un sueño que tenemos, porque dentro de la herencia que tenemos en Colombia, los negros, las personas negras africanas que nacimos en Colombia, que no somos colombianos, es que somos africanos.
So this, part of the barriers that we've had to face living in Colombia, us people of African descent in Colombia, which his dream was actually to come to Africa for the first time. And by the way, this side note, this is his first trip to Africa.
Pero para nosotros, África queda muy lejos, como tal vez para el continente queda muy lejos porque el desconocimiento de la raíz, ¿sí? De la raíz cultural que tenemos, y no es por la distancia, después de 20 horas de 2 escalas grandes, llegar a África, no es por la distancia, sino por esa cuestión del sentimiento, de que sí somos africanos, pero ¿dónde está? ¿Sí?
So there's a distance within the psyche of the Afro-Colombian, and it's not a physical distance, even though it took him 20 hours to fly here to Kenya.
Wow.
It's a distance of the mind, of where do we actually come from in this great continent? Who do we identify with?
A veces en Colombia sufrimos mucho rechazo y mucha crítica. En un mundial es más fácil apoyar a un país de África que apoyar a mismo Colombia, porque Colombia nunca ha entendido que tenemos una herencia y una esencia con el continente antes que una sociedad que nos ha rechazado como la sociedad donde vivimos. Yeah?
So you know, one of the big challenges in Colombia from a kind of structural racism perspective is that you know, for a lot of Afro-Colombians, they can identify more, for example, with an African football team playing, you know, than their own teams within their country, because they see themselves reflected in society.
Eso convierte que cuando en Colombia la dirigencia que siempre, la herencia colonial española que ha dominado el país, no entienda, no quiera tampoco esta población, ¿sí? Que es muy grande, y en las estadísticas siempre intentan cortar que no existe esa población, pero cuando juega el equipo nacional de fútbol son la inmensa mayoría, ¿sí? Es algo igual como sucede con Francia. Entonces no pueden ocultar esa gran población.
So part of the Spanish colonial heritage is sort of the upper class, or the governing class of Colombian society, trying to minimize the presence of Africans within their own country. And they used to do it statistically. So they would say, you know, our population is only 6% Afro-Colombian, 8%, when it's really around 25%. So this is something that they've been fighting for, is the recognition of their Africanness within Colombia.
De toda esta población que está en la diáspora, y sobre todo la diáspora de que habla español, en Colombia puedes encontrar todavía muchos apellidos de muchos pueblos africanos, ¿sí? Balantas, Minas, Lucumís, todo un acervo, pues, de que, asumiendo que tenemos un origen, ¿sí? Y no conocíamos nuestros apellidos, como lo decía Malcolm X, empezamos a tener todo el acervo nuestro de los apellidos de nuestros pueblos, ¿sí? De Ararat, de todos esos pueblos etnias que estaban en África, y que hoy ya queremos también aprender Swahili, y empezamos a proyectar el aprendizaje del Swahili para entenderlo mejor.
And so one of the things you'll find in Colombia is a lot of Afro-Colombians have African last names, like Lukumi, Karabali, like Calabar in Nigeria. Lukumi is also a Nigerian Yoruba name. So we didn't really know the meaning of these surnames that we have. So now we're in this connection moment, and with the Vice President of Colombia, who's the first elected Black Vice President of Colombia, who came last year, that we hosted here in Kenya and South Africa. There's this curiosity now to reconnect, and now they're actually learning Swahili in some parts of Kenya.
Para ir respondiendo más preciso, nosotros estamos emprendiendo un proceso de sentirnos orgullosos de lo que éramos, y hoy la siguiente etapa es que todos nuestros niños están con la tarea grande, los niños, ¿sí? Estamos revolucionando a través de los niños para que ellos sean los que completen la tarea. Muchos de ellos tienen sus nombres propios que les colocamos acá en África, en el continente. Mi hija le ubicamos también otro nombre de muchas personas de acá del continente, porque eso es lo que estamos buscando redefinir. La estética también. Hemos redefinido mucha estética, muchos lo teníamos años atrás, pero la sociedad colombiana siempre nos rechazaba por ese tipo de cosas, pero ya se entiende que tenemos un peso político, económico y cultural, porque la cultura de ese país básicamente es la que nosotros representamos.
So one of the things that they've achieved over the past decades is redefining their Africanness as Colombians, and now they're at a stage where they have political representation, cultural representation, and now economic as well. And so his job as a father as well, he's given his daughter an African name, is for that next generation to now carry that through in connection with Africa.
Queremos pronto que tengan la oportunidad de conocernos allá, y hoy muchos de nuestros hermanos ya están retornando al continente, tanto físicamente, como lo decía también Malcolm X, mentalmente. Y pronto seremos un gran poder, un poder negro en el mundo, porque hoy, como sucede en el mundo, África está creciendo. La comunidad negra de la diáspora africana en Latinoamérica y en Colombia también es la que más desarrollo está teniendo, y en poco tiempo seremos un gran poder a nivel mundial.
So one of the interesting
Nuestro momento.
dynamics in terms of this moment for people of African descent in Latin America is similar to Africa having this great growth story, especially East Africa. In fact, the black communities of Latin America are also having the greatest growth trajectory in their history. So there's tremendous opportunities for trade, investment, and connection that's going to happen. And you're going to see more people of African descent who may speak Portuguese, who may speak Spanish as a first language here on the African continent.
Y gracias por recibirme acá.
And thank you for having me here.